It's the 9th of December 2013, and journalists, photographers and fans are gathered on the Champs-Élysées. They're all trying to attract the attention of movie star Leonardo DiCaprio. He's attending the premiere of his latest film, The Wolf of Wall Street. In it, he plays one of his most memorable roles. It's the extraordinary story of a trader who was worth millions at the age of only 27. But what people don't know is that it's the story of a real man. He's in his 50s, a handsome man, and his name is Jordan Belfort. He's the real hero of the film. He inspired this incredible success story that you just couldn't invent. And the craziest part is that it's all true. We found this footage previously unseen in France. In it, you can see all the trader's excesses. At the age of 28, he owned this yacht, a helicopter, and he threw the most incredible parties.
We'll be a legend on Wall Street, guys, and that's our goal. All right? That's what
it was work, 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 play, 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 and everything was done at 100 miles an hour. There were no half measures.
In the 1990s, Jordan Belfort was the incarnation of American success with all its excesses. Sex, drugs, and dollars galore.
Whenever I saw him, they were always drugged up. They were always on drugs. I mean, it was amazing. The last time I saw Jordan, his eyes were out here. I mean, they were always on drugs.
The incredible story of Jordan Belfort was that of a New Yorker from a modest background who was to make hundreds of millions of dollars without having any qualifications. His only weapon was his remarkable charisma.
This man could sell ice to Eskimos. That's a gift, a talent. He was born with it.
He was more like a god of sales. The Wolf of Wall Street, as he said.
Jordan Belfort recounted his life in detail in his autobiography, published in 2006. A fascinating book that built the myth of the Wolf of Wall Street. But in his quest for power, Jordan tends to forget that he built his empire on massive fraud.
Belfort was the right guy at the right place, committing the right kind of crimes if you're a criminal.
We went to meet the people who knew him. His former employees, his lawyer, the victims of his scams, and the man who investigated him for years in order to arrest him. They all talk about Jordan Belfort as a calculating man without morals or scruples, a complex character who inspired as much admiration as hatred.
Jordan Belfort is a lot of fun to be around. I really like him. I don't trust him. I wouldn't give him my money, but I love hanging out with him.
In this program, we profile this symbol of the crazy 90s, when money was king. If Jordan Belfort is the perfect incarnation of the American dream, it's because this man who caused the New York Stock Exchange to quake was born here in the Bronx in 1963. At the time, it was one of the poorest areas of New York, riven by gang warfare and drug trafficking. Jordan came from a modest family. He was the second son of Leah and Max Belfort, and his parents' profession no doubt had an effect on his life. They were accountants. So Jordan grew up hearing about the economy, finance, and profits. His childhood was marked by the social deprivation in his neighborhood and the fear of not having enough money.
The 1970s were a period, I think, when Americans worried a lot about inflation. And, you know, maybe that was part of New York City's problem too. Prices were rising, and so everything cost more for the city. And the revenues were not coming in fast enough to cover the city's costs.
To protect their children from the criminality in the Bronx, the Belforts decided to move. They couldn't afford to go to the center of New York in Manhattan. So they chose the less central, but much quieter, neighborhood of Queens. They settled here in Bayside. It's a small town beside the Atlantic Ocean. We managed to find the place where the family lived. It's an unglamorous apartment block, typical of the American middle classes. The parents' names are still on the intercom. Here, Jordan turned out to be a very unusual child. He suffered terrible panic attacks and slept very little.
His mother would go into his room at night to check he was asleep, and he'd be sitting up on his bed. He wasn't asleep at all.
Jordan always had a complex about his roots. He was Jewish and a bit ashamed of it. Because the people with the power here are middle-class Protestants. The famous WASPs who live in the smart areas of Manhattan. Even as a child, he wanted to climb up the social ladder. He had a need to turn the tables on his humble background.
He described himself as a little Jewish kid. You get the feeling he wasn't comfortable. He'd have liked to look more like the American ideal. He'd have liked to be tall, blonde and slim, whereas he was short and a bit plump. He was a good-looking kid when you see him, but he didn't necessarily think he was. So he was uncomfortable both physically and socially. He didn't like the fact that he was middle class. What he dreamt about were beautiful, hugely expensive cars and tall, blonde supermodel women.
As a teenager, Jordan had expensive tastes, but as he came from a modest family, he had no choice. If he wanted pocket money, he had to work. In the summer when he was 16, a heat wave hit New York. Jordan bought 2 cool boxes and went to a park close to his home.
One summer was selling ices on the beach. I mean, he was going like from blanket to blanket trying to sell this stuff, and he was doing very well. He is a natural born salesman from the get-go. And then he was getting his friends to do it, and even as a teenager, he was able to get other people to do selling for him and make money off them.
At the end of the summer, he tallied up the accounts. Jordan had only invested about $10 at the start. But after just 2 months, he pocketed an incredible jackpot of $20,000. A businessman was born. Jordan Belfort saved the money to fund his university studies. He left the family home and traveled to Baltimore, 3 hours' drive from New York. He enrolled at a college that he thought would fulfill his dreams of wealth. The Baltimore College of Dental Surgery. But things didn't go as planned there.
He did what his mother wanted and went to dental school. And the first day, he says in his book, the first day of dental school, he was told by whoever was up there standing in front of the class that, you know, the glory days of making money in dentistry are over. And so he said, well, what the hell am I doing here?
He got up and left the class and never went back to dental school, much to his mother's despair. But he quickly landed on his feet.
That was 1983. Jordan Belfort was 20 years old and had no qualifications. He'd hoped to get back at the WASPs through the prestigious profession of dentistry. It hadn't worked out. So he went back to what he'd always been good at: buying and selling. He started working as a salesman in New York. He drove around the city in a truck selling meat and frozen seafood.
Jordan joined the company, became a salesman, and quickly broke all the sales records. He was the best in the company. So that, of course, gave him an idea. He asked a friend to leave with him to set up their own company selling meat and frozen products door to door.
After a few months, Jordan resigned and set up his own company in competition. He was sure he didn't need any help and that money would pour in. For the first few months, he was right.
At first, they had just one truck, and soon afterwards they had 26 trucks. He realised that when you set up a business and buy from wholesalers, you can pay them after you've sold the stock. He identified a potentially profitable form of financial leverage.
The awkward and anxious teenager had turned into a successful entrepreneur. With money pouring in, he'd found the way to beat his inferiority complex. Jordan had got his revenge, and he wanted people to know about it. At the age of just 21, he bought himself a red Porsche that he liked to drive around the streets of Bayside. But behind this show of success, there was a major problem. Jordan only thought about money. He didn't care about the law. He left invoices unpaid. His bankers harassed him. He had to file for bankruptcy.
For him, the worst thing was when the bailiffs came and seized his Porsche. It was his first Porsche, and to him, it was the symbol of his social emancipation, his social rise. He shed a tear, but that was it. You could tell that he would do anything to avoid making that kind of mistake again.
The young man started again from scratch. A neighbour advised him to look for work in this street in Lower Manhattan. Wall Street. It's the historical business centre of the city, the symbol of America's financial power. Back then in the 80s, Wall Street was bubbling. All New Yorkers believed that the stock exchange had saved the city from bankruptcy. Jordan was immediately smitten. He could see the guarantee of an easy job and the promise of making lots of money. In addition, there was a film out back then about the world of finance. That was Wall Street by Oliver Stone, starring Michael Douglas. The story revealed the financial misdeeds of Gordon Gekko, an unscrupulous trader. It made an impression on Jordan and gave him a vocation.
We're going down the drain, okay? The stock is plummeting. When it hits 18, buy it all.
Something big is going down. I want you to fill out the missing picture. Wall Street.
Well-dressed young men were making a lot of money. They were calling themselves masters of the universe. They were doing deals. I think the movie called Wall Street, which was in that late 1980s, captured the spirit of the place. There were people making a lot of money there.
Spirit, greed.
The aim of Gordon Gekko was to make as much money as possible. His famous line was to become Jordan's mantra.
Surge of mankind and greed.
Greed is good.
Greed is good.
Greed, for lack of a better word, is good.
It was in 1987, when Jordan was 24, that he got on a bus wearing his newly pressed suit with his CV in his hand. He was determined to conquer Wall Street. This was when the course of his life changed forever. Jordan's appointment was on the 23rd floor of a skyscraper on the famous Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. He was applying to be a trainee trader with L.F. Rothschild.
L.F. Rothschild was what we call an investment bank. The securities companies, the brokerage houses, built big trading floors and hired more people and using computer systems to trade securities. And online trading came in where people could use their computer to buy and sell stocks. You know, that really became big in the 1980s and 90s.
Even in his job interview, Jordan impressed his audience.
His employer said, "Give me a reason why I should employ you." He replied, "What do you want me to do?" And he said, "Make me want to buy something." He picked a stock from the index at random. He knew nothing about it. And he started to sing the praises of this stock. He said, "It's going to perform well. Profits are guaranteed." And the employer said, "What you just did is totally illegal, because we never guarantee profits, but I'll still give you a job."
The next day, Jordan entered a legendary place, the boiler room. It was packed with traders glued to their phones. It was a visual shock that he described at length in his book. It was a sound I'd never forget, like the roar of a mob. A sound that would change my life forever. It was the sound of young men engulfed by greed and ambition, pitching their hearts and souls out to wealthy business owners across America.
It's sort of an exciting thing because you're making big decisions in split seconds. You know, you're buying in one place and selling in another. And if you make a good deal, you yell hooray. And if you have a bad deal, you say, oh no, and utter some profanity or something like that.
He couldn't believe it. He was very surprised, as someone from the middle class in Queens, to be entering this sort of temple of finance with such a prestigious name.
For 6 months, the trainee learnt the tricks of the trade. As he was new, he was only a connector. His task was to call potential buyers on the phone and then to pass them to the trader to conclude the deal. In this new environment, Jordan was continually humiliated and insulted by his superiors, but he swallowed his pride. After several months, he obtained the Holy Grail, a trader's license. It was September 1987, and Jordan was getting ready to start his rise in the spheres of finance, when suddenly, an unforeseeable event brought it all to an abrupt halt.
On October 19th, 1987, the stock market fell like 22% in one day. It's the biggest one-day drop ever. Stocks lost like 22% of their value in one day.
The sky fell in. He found out that L.F. Rothschild, the Temple of Finance, was going under, and he lost his job.
There was no question of promotion, or even of working at L.F. Rothschild anymore. It was hard for him. He was very scared of having to start all over again.
There was no more work in Wall Street. So Jordan looked in the papers for a new job that would make his fortune. One ad caught his eye. A broker's job in a company some distance away from Manhattan. The Investors Center was a company that was doing well out of some somewhat unusual stocks.
They're called penny stocks, sometimes even cent stocks. They're stocks with a very low price.
These stocks aren't listed on the market, so there's no regulation. Anything goes. Prices can be manipulated at will.
Here they specialized in selling packages of stocks to credulous pensioners or to somewhat gullible savers. They thought they'd hit the jackpot by betting on small companies that were meant to skyrocket in a few months. In reality, the person who made money was Jordan.
In his first month working at the Investors Center, he made $38,000. The next month, he made $70,000. So the trend was definitely upwards. In the first year, he made $500,000 in total, so he didn't lose out.
Thanks to these stocks that he sold for a few cents, Jordan finally became rich. He took a perverse pleasure in strutting about outside the local country club, the exclusive reserve of the Protestant bourgeoisie. The Jewish boy from the rough part of New York would never be allowed to join that club.
Even when he was at the top, he wanted to prove that he was better than all these wasps, to crush them, ridicule them, and extract money from them.
Jordan was now 26. His sales technique was fearsome. He decided to go into business for himself with a friend and colleague, Danny Porosh.
Together they set up a company called Stratton Oakmont. The name was deliberately chosen to give them an air of respectability. That was already the start of the fraud.
The two associates moved into a former garage on Long Island. Similar to the Investors Center, Stratton Oakmont sold stocks in small companies with low stock prices. But this time, Jordan had a brilliant idea. They would approach big players, businessmen able to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars. To do that, he took on about a dozen friends that he knew from his childhood in Bayside. Guys who were not very bright and knew nothing about the world of finance.
It started like any small, slightly half-baked company. Things were a bit haphazard.
The start was lackluster, so Jordan worked more on his sales technique. After a few months, he gave his employees a sort of handbook of hard selling. Named the Straight Line Persuasion System, it anticipated the responses of potential clients.
He gave them a sheet of prepared dialogue, which his employees just had to learn by heart in order to be even more persuasive.
We tracked down Jordan Belfort's lawyer, and he well remembers the patter the fledgling traders learned by heart.
Potential investors, this stock is going to double in price, it's going to triple in price. We have inside information, we're very close to management. We know things that others don't know. This is a great opportunity. I've got 5,000 shares left, it's going very quickly. And then if they had pushback from individuals who said, well, I need to talk to my wife, the broker would say, what do you mean you have to talk to your wife? Don't you make the decisions in the house? What, are you afraid? This is an opportunity. Your wife will love you for this.
The success was remarkable. After only 1 year, Stratton Oakmont moved to much larger, brand new premises. This is 1979 Marcus Avenue. It was behind these windows that Jordan Belfort's legend was written. After just a few years, he had over 1,000 people working here, and he made several $1 million with his particularly effective methods. The choice of this location, away from Wall Street, was not by chance, according to Joel Cohen, the prosecutor who investigated Stratton Oakmont over a long period.
I suspect they opened in Long Island in this warehouse building because it was inexpensive and because they were able to recruit large numbers of relatively uneducated but very eager and hungry young brokers in Long Island who thought this was the greatest job in the world. They didn't have a chance in Manhattan to recruit the same kinds of people.
Among the young wolves attracted by the easy money was Roman Ansari, who has agreed to give us his exclusive inside story on this unusual company.
I was working in a deli. One of the young kids walked into the company. He was probably 24 years old. I'm not going to disclose the name for now. And he was wearing a presidential Rolex, and I looked at the watch and I asked him, what do you do? And he says, I'm a stockbroker. And my question was, do you make a lot of money? He says, I made more last year than you're going to make ever in your life. My question was, how do I do that? He gave me his card, and he said, you want to make money? Be there 7 o'clock in the morning.
The next day, Roman went to Long Island. He was amazed by what he saw in the Stratton Oakmont parking lot.
From Ferraris to Lamborghinis to Maybachs to Porsches, anything. I don't remember seeing any cars that were like cheap.
Inside, the atmosphere was supercharged, even at 6:30 in the morning.
Imagine a room full of, 1,500 people you walk into, and just a lot of noise. So it was, where do I look? What do I pay attention to?
Roman wasn't that unusual. Jordan Belfort recruited his employees straight out of school when they were 18 or 20. That way he could train them in his unusual sales techniques.
Some were college graduates, many were high school graduates. They are required still today in the United States to pass a license, what's called a Series 7 broker-dealer license. It's not a very difficult exam. Many of them had failed it several times, and in fact, we came to discover when we began to try to arrest or use as cooperating witnesses some of the brokers that many of them had hired people to take the test for them in their name.
Every morning, Jordan Belfort stood on a platform and gave an impassioned speech to his Stratonians, as he liked to call them. These moments of jubilation were crucial to the management of the company. The 28-year-old boss promised the young traders lavish lifestyles. Hungry for money and adrenaline, they literally gulped down his words.
He had an extraordinary ability to fire up his teams with these big speeches. He was an excellent orator. He was a guru.
He was their cult leader. He even admitted he was like a cult leader to them. He would get up there, he would tell them how they were going to make a lot of money, they were going to own it, they were going to be like him, and they were going to party really hard, and they did.
To keep up with the hellish pace, the traders gave in to the temptation of alcohol and drugs that made them elated and hypersensitive. Cocaine and mandrax, a drug that gets you high. All these substances were in common use at Stratton Oakmont. Dealers even delivered direct to employees in their offices.
When you're living a fast-paced life, you need a getaway. And because you can't get away, not that you don't have the money, but because you don't have the time, drugs give you a temporary getaway. They vacate your mind. They put you in a different world.
Alden Cass is a psychologist. He's helped many Wall Street traders to escape from the grip of drugs.
A lot of the brokers who were using drugs were doing it to kill the pain and the guilt and their conscience for having, misleading investors.
Jordan himself was completely addicted. He took dozens of pills every day.
When I arrived on Wall Street, I knew nothing about drugs. I never took them. But after a while, it seemed completely normal. It's like getting into a hot bath. At first, you dip your toe in and take it out straight away because it's too hot. 5 minutes later, you're right in it and you feel great.
Whenever I saw him, they were always drugged up. They were always on drugs. I mean, it was amazing. The last time I saw Jordan, his eyes were out here. I mean, they were always on drugs.
The young traders treated Stratton Oakmont like a huge playground. There was an incredible atmosphere of debauchery, rarely seen in trading rooms. Even Jordan was slightly taken aback by what went on.
One day, he saw two employees, a woman and a man. The woman was a 17-year-old assistant, and she was giving the man a blowjob in the office elevator. It was a glass elevator, so everyone could see. He told me, when I saw that, I was very shocked. But when I realized that no one complained, the people who saw it didn't complain, and neither did the assistant who'd done it, I left them to it. And if people are having fun, that's fine. He did send a memo around the company telling employees not to have sex between 8 a.m. and 7 p.m. And the memo had a picture of a couple having sex, doggy style, in a circle, with a line through it, like a sort of stop sign.
But the rule wasn't obeyed. Jordan Belfort wasn't even the first to break it when he organised ever crazier challenges to motivate his Stratton Oakmont troops.
We used to have a Hooker Tuesday. You have two people sitting on each side of the table. There's a lady on the table dancing. Both people have to close a sale. Whoever closes the sale faster is her reward.
Jordan Belfort would have no hesitation in spending tens of thousands of dollars on parties to celebrate a stock market launch or a contract. The parties were incredibly debauched.
We found this footage, which has never previously been broadcast in France. It shows coachloads of Stratton Oakmont employees arriving at parties given by their boss.
You'll be a legend on Wall Street, guys, and that's our goal. All right? That's all. Everybody,
Jordan Belfort pampered his employees with lots of boozy parties. He wanted to give the impression of a company where anything goes and where you have to live for the present.
Nobody else has this. Cherish this time of your life, people. It doesn't come around that often. It doesn't. Cherish it, hold it sacred.
Jordan collected gleaming new cars, travelled around by helicopter, and even bought himself a 50-metre yacht, the height of luxury.
Jordan Belfort's rise in society was all about owning things and showing them off. Today we'd say it was all about the bling.
The final piece to complete his image as the perfect millionaire was his wife, Nadine, a beautiful British model that he'd noticed in a TV advertisement.
That's mine.
Yeah, doggy.
Miller Lite, where less filling really tastes great.
His hold over her was money, and her hold over him was love, or sex, or at any rate the illusion of having a perfect marriage.
Jordan lived at 200 miles an hour. He finally had his social vengeance, and as if to validate his power, he bought this house, which we visited in Long Island. It was previously owned by the former president of the New York Stock Exchange, and it's in Brookville, the super smart neighborhood of Long Island.
He said to me, you know, nothing was ever enough for me. And even when I bought this house, I thought, driveway's not long enough. I'm gonna have to put in a longer driveway. That was the kind of guy he was. It was never enough. He reminds me kind of like that little brother that people want to ignore and refuses to be ignored, and he's gonna show you one day. And Jordan went out to show everybody.
Surprisingly, this excessive lifestyle of crazy spending was also a well-thought-out strategy to control his Strattonians, to drive them to sacrifice themselves at work in order to imitate his lifestyle.
In spite of all the money they earn, they're all as broke as each other. They spend every cent they have trying to imitate my lifestyle, so they end up having trouble making ends meet when they earn $1 million a year. What I mean is, it's easier to control them if they're broke.
That's kind of what makes them tick. They're very calculating and manipulative individuals that manipulate others to gain attention. They are masters at playing off of human psychology of others and really trying to get people to want to be, with them, and they want to be in a power position of power and control where other people are coming to them all the time. It makes them feel better about themselves.
But this whole world of decadence, where millions of dollars rained down every day, was in reality built on massive fraud. In 1991, Forbes, the most important magazine in the financial world, ran a profile of Jordan Belfort. It was a killer blow. The journalist highlighted the dubious dealings at Stratton Oakmont.
The article was quite negative. The title was Stakes, Stocks, What's the Difference? It was a play on words between stakes and stocks, referring to his past as a meat salesman. So the title was quite ironic. The article described Jordan as a person whose only ambition, whether he was selling steak or stocks, was to make himself lots of money. The article stated in black and white that Stratton Oakmont was selling stocks to gullible investors who were completely taken in. So even at the time, the somewhat dubious actions of Stratton Oakmont were common knowledge.
We tracked down one of the victims of Jordan's company. Robert Sheeran was contacted by Stratton Oakmont in 1992. At the time, he was a young textiles entrepreneur and wanted to invest his savings.
I got a call from one of his brokers named Paul Greco, and Paul says, my name's Paul Greco, I'm with Stratton Oakmont, and I was referred to you by, I can't remember the fellow's name, but he was one of my classmates at Harvard Business School. And he said, I made him a lot of money. He gave me your name, said that you were a player, that you were aggressive, that you were smart, that you'd be interested in me making you a lot of money too. And that kind of opened the dialogue.
Persuaded by the caller's unstoppable patter, Robert Sheeran allowed himself to be tempted in by the promise of quick profits. First of all, he invested $11,000 in some stocks that proved to be very lucrative.
He let me make a little money out of it. Made a couple of thousand out of that. So my head is saying, 20% in, a month. That's terrific. And of course, then he said, okay, now let's get more aggressive. And so I was ready to jump in. And I did.
The entrepreneur bought several $100,000 worth of stocks through Stratton Oakmont. Like him, the other victims of this fraud were carefully targeted. They were individuals living outside the state of New York. Easily influenced people without connections to the world of Wall Street. It was impossible for them to check the fine words of the traders.
There's always some incredible story behind them. The difference between today and then, in 1992, there wasn't an internet where you could quickly get on an internet and verify the story.
They would say, oh, this is the greatest stock ever. We've got this new company, it's going public. It's going to sell water in supermarkets in big jars. And nobody's ever thought of this before. And people are going to want to come to the supermarket and refill these recyclable jars, and it's going to be a huge winner, and you're going to get in first.
The company is just a vacant storefront in New York. There's not even a company there. It's just a storefront with a name.
But Jordan wasn't satisfied with this kind of deception. He always wanted more, like a compulsive gambler. So he then perfected another kind of scam called pump and dump.
Pump and dump is where you pump the price of the stock up and then you dump your holdings at the inflated price.
There was a famous phrase they used, okay, let's get on the phones now and put some lipstick on this pig. You know, in other words, it was a bad thing they were selling, but they were going to put lipstick on it, perfume maybe, and make people think it was good.
The best example is the Steve Madden case. In 1993, Jordan personally wanted to stake $500,000 in the fashionable footwear brand. Jordan wanted to own 50% of the company's capital, and he had a valuable piece of knowledge. He knew that the brand was soon going to launch on the stock exchange. In reality, Stratton Oakmont wasn't allowed to own such a large proportion of the company. So Jordan resorted to an illegal tactic. He set up front companies run by his friends. He thus escaped the attention of the SEC. The Securities and Exchange Commission is the watchdog of the American Stock Exchange. The day Steve Madden was launched on the stock exchange, Stratton Oakmont bought large quantities of stocks from the front companies at $5. Everyone in the market was surprised at this action and thought they'd better do the same. So they bought Madden. The stock price shot up. Jordan had succeeded in making it rise artificially to $18. And then he told all his traders to sell. He made a huge profit. In 10 minutes, Jordan Belfort pocketed $20 million. And he repeated this illegal operation more than once.
Stratton Oakmont took public around 34 or 35 companies. Most of them were companies where the fundamental idea behind the company was not very good or was horrible, made no sense whatsoever. And the idea of what the company would do didn't really matter much to Belfort because his plan was not to genuinely sell a company idea, but to engage in pump and dump.
The people who suffer most in this sort of scam are those who buy stocks a few days after the artificial inflation of the stock price. For them, the stock price nosedives to below the initial buy-in level. That's what happened to Robert Sheeran. For months, all he received from Stratton Oakmont was bad news.
When I finally kind of woke up and asked to get all the funds out, that's when the real dogfight began. I was in screaming matches with Greco's boss, telling them, sell whatever you got to sell it at. I want my money out. I'm done. Screaming. The guy was on the other end of the phone just saying, you're too freaking stupid to ever make any money. You're an idiot. And just screaming at me. Twice they flipped it into another stock rather than sending me the money back. They just took it, flipped it to another one. So it took an incredible amount of effort to get them to finally cash out the account and send me what was left.
In the end, Robert Sheeran lost a large proportion of his savings, $170,000. And for others, the situation was even worse.
Many of his victims, hundreds of them, lost much or all of their life savings to his schemes. Many of them lost the ability to pay for their homes, their retirement funds, to pay for their children's college or university funds. Those are facts. And when Belfort says they were all rich, as if somehow that makes it different, it's factually inaccurate and it's offensive.
On Wall Street, people were starting to talk about this company that made millions and rewarded its traders with prostitutes. After receiving many complaints, the SEC, the stock exchange watchdog, was on the trail of Jordan Belfort. In 1992, 2 agents moved into the offices of Stratton Oakmont. They were looking for any documents that could indicate fraud.
The heating was turned off, so they felt really cold. The room was, of course, bugged. In fact, Jordan's idea was to follow the saying, keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
Jordan and Danny were huge risk takers. They thought they could beat the SEC, and quite frankly, we were successful for a number of years in beating the SEC.
But the SEC failed to catch Jordan. So one man swore that he would get the Wolf of Wall Street. That was Gregory Coleman, an FBI agent. He agreed to talk to us about the most important investigation of his life. When it all started, he was 30, a straightforward, honest man with a modest lifestyle. He was the opposite of Jordan Belfort. And he particularly disliked Jordan's greed and profligacy.
One of the things we discovered was actually it was very difficult to make any progress in the beginning. The reason being, many of the brokers and many of the employees were making millions of dollars. Young guys in their early 20s, mid-20s, making millions in income. And there was really no incentive to cooperate with the FBI or with regulators. So it was very difficult for us to make sort of inroads into the fraud itself. He's a very charismatic guy. He's a very good motivational speaker. And so I knew my job would be difficult.
It was a game of hide and seek with the FBI, for which he had utter contempt. So he loved it. He was a crook, and he knew it. But as he had no scruples or remorse, it wasn't about good and evil. For him, it was about who won and who lost. So he was going to play with the FBI and show them just how hopeless they were.
And the first victory in the war went to the SEC. After 2 years' investigation, it had managed to collect conclusive evidence of wrongdoing. Jordan Belfort had to give up the leadership of his empire, to pay a fine of $2 million, and the worst punishment of all, to lose his trader's license.
Jordan Belfort, in particular, was severely punished since he lost his trader's status. Officially, he wasn't allowed to do his job in the company anymore, although he retained his unofficial status as the top dog in Stratton Oakmont. He also continued to receive a comfortable income.
In reality, to compensate him for his ousting, Jordan continued to be paid an astronomical salary. $1 million a month. Far from diminishing, his lifestyle became even more extravagant. But then he made an error that was to prove fatal. He arranged for a large proportion of his income to evade taxation. In an extraordinary scheme, he quietly sent money in cash to Switzerland.
He used couriers. He did use a woman who was a Swiss citizen married to an American citizen. It was a husband and wife duo. The husband was actually a drug dealer. The wife was a Swiss citizen, so it was the perfect combination.
Fearing nothing, Jordan even came up with the totally crazy and terribly risky idea of taping cash to the bodies of his smugglers.
He took cash, provided it to the couriers, and in 2 or 3 different ways, sometimes in their luggage, sometimes on their person, sometimes a combination of the two. And they brought in other people as the fraud progressed. They smuggled the cash out of the United States and deposited it into banks in Switzerland.
But in the shadows, FBI agent Gregory Coleman and SEC agent Joel Cohen combined forces to take down Jordan Belfort's network. They gained the trust of the Swiss authorities and finally received proof of money laundering.
And I remember the great breakthrough was when we did our third or fourth trip to Geneva. We came back, and in the post came this box, and inside the box was the Form A, and we opened up the Form A, and it confirmed what we knew, that it said that Jordan Belfort and some of his partners actually controlled these accounts.
For Jordan Belfort, there was no escape route. He was surrounded on all sides. In 1998, he was arrested and charged with fraud and money laundering.
He knew I was chasing him for 6 years. He was tired at that point, and I think in some respects he was happy that it was over. At the end of the day, he pled guilty to all of the deals that he had manipulated back to the beginning.
The guilty man was facing a hefty prison sentence, but once again, Jordan found a way to save himself. The American justice system can show clemency to people who cooperate, so Jordan handed everything over. He gave them the list of all his accomplices.
Belfort had not decided to cooperate, if he had not decided to work with the government, to take a guilty plea and work with the government, it would be mandatory that he be sentenced to 21 to 27 years if he was convicted.
In the end, Jordan Belfort came out of it well. He was sentenced to just 4 years in prison, but all his assets were seized, his properties, his helicopter, and his bank accounts.
I took everything I could find. Every dollar he made, almost virtually every dollar he made from the beginning, was proceeds of criminal activity, and therefore it was subject to seizure and forfeiture.
At his sentencing, Belfort was required by the judge to pay back up to $110 million over the course of his life to his victims. And the judge did something inventive. He instructed that Belfort could keep 50% of the money that he made through the course of his life and would have to pay the other 50% to the victims until he satisfied the $110 million amount. Because he understood that Belfort had the capacity to earn money, but if the court took 100% of his money, Belfort would never make any money and no victims would get money back.
After many court hearings, Jordan was incarcerated in a federal prison in early 2002. Because of his good behavior, he only served 22 months, and he even met someone interesting.
All these crazy things happen to him, and then he ends up spending 22 months in prison, being sent across the country into the hottest, driest, most miserable part of California. And his cellmate is Tommy Chong of Cheech and Chong. Now, of all the federal inmates in the system, your cellmate is somebody who's famous and well-known.
Jordan was 40 years old, and his American dream ended here in prison. But once again, he bounced back. He used his time in prison to write down his incredible story. His modest childhood, his craving for money, the prodigious drug-taking, and his slow descent into hell.
Tommy said, you know, you ought to write a book. Well, he didn't know anything about writing a book, so he said he started reading Tom Wolfe, Bonfire of the Vanities, and he began crafting a book sort of in that style.
As soon as he was released in 2004, Jordan published his autobiography. It went straight into that year's bestseller list. The Wolf of Wall Street was to be the starting point of his return to grace.
He's come out smelling like a rose. In some ways, this enhances his reputation. So he spent 22 months to end up with kind of a bigger-than-life reputation.
In the book, Jordan Belfort describes all his excesses in detail, from the 22 drugs he tried to the innumerable escort girls. He neatly glosses over his fraudulent actions and drops in a few notions of remorse. Above all, he builds up the legend of a sales genius and even presents himself as a victim of capitalism. He admits to a single error, that of being blinded by easy money when he was too young.
Jordan Belfort was no victim of the system. Jordan Belfort took advantage of the system. was just one more amazing thing. Who else would end up having Leonardo DiCaprio play him on the big screen except Jordan Belfort? It's like, what can possibly be next for that guy? President. He'll be president.
Belfort says in the media that he's paying back all the money to the victims. Well, one just needs to go to the court file to know that's not true. He isn't, and he hasn't for years.
He still owes over $100 million in restitution to the federal government, which is supposed to go to the victims.
So I'm still waiting for my check from Jordan. I'm sure it's in the mail.
It's making massive progress below the waterline. And all of a sudden, that last pinch of certainty is the it's what we can't try and see, have a conversation at the same time, right? That's the consciously confidence thing. One of the greatest myths, and I've seen this myself in person, is that you really shouldn't ask for the order more than 2, maybe 3 times. Let me tell you something. Most times it's on actually the 5th or 6th time that you actually ask someone to take action that they do take action.
I think a lot of young men in particular go because they want to see the guy who was in the movie. And even though the guy ended up breaking the law and going to prison, gosh, he got a lot of women, he did a lot of drugs, he had a lot of toys, and maybe they kind of want to be like him.
You know, America is sometimes said to be the land of second and third chances. And so I think in some other countries, you would be ashamed to go out and tell about the bad things you did. But in America, there's a market for hearing about people telling the story of bad things they did. And
you do wrong, go to prison, Leonardo DiCaprio plays you on the big screen, and now you're making money as selling tickets to come people to see you now. This is what we do in this country.
Perhaps to escape from Wall Street and its vices, Jordan Belfort now lives on the other side of the United States, in California, in this small house overlooking the sea. Although he no longer has the excessive lifestyle that he did in his 30s, Jordan can savor his victory. He's succeeded in turning his scandalous past into a profitable business. Thousands of his fans drink in his words day after day. The king of sales is back.